All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be getting back in the habit of reviewing my trades. And first day of the week. And today's actually my first red day on options. And I don't know. I think it's been like 4 or 5 weeks. I try not to keep track of green streaks. It is a very destructive habit that I knocked out a long time ago. But it's been a long time. Now, as far as what could have been today, I could have been green today. One of my trades was kind of questionable. Not sure if I take that same trade again. But as far as the analysis goes today, my general sentiment, it was spot on. And a lot of you guys did end up making decent money this morning. A lot of you guys who were in the live session with me did end up finishing green. But the problem is, I only trade the first hour. That's my rule, right? I don't care if I know what's going to happen in the second hour. I only trade the first hour. So, unfortunately, my bias ended up playing out after I was done trading. But regardless, this was 1 minute before market open. And as far as the pre-market analysis goes, we do have a gap on ES here. Now, as you guys know, I am very bullish or bearish for gaps to fill. NQ did fill its gap from Sunday, but ES still has this remainder of a gap left. And so I'm bearish for this to fill, but it's not close at all, right? It's just nowhere close. And as far as pivots, I mean, we have a decent amount of pivots below. I mean, I have this one on ES. I have these on NQ. And we are starting the morning compressing. Now, I'm leaning rather bearish this morning, not only because of that gap on ES, but NQ has a lot of very nice pivots below, and ES does have a sell side liquidity sweep here, right? Now, it did form a 30-minute supply, which I did have to draw. The supply and demand indicator will be updated. Ideally, by the end of this week, I'm going to contact my developer and get that done. Now that the path to success and all that stuff is pretty much complete. But anyways, that's kind of the setup. Leaning bearish this morning, really. Now, when the market opens, if we do end up running up, I can enter calls for this pre-market high here. Now, we do have a decent amount of supply on NQ. But if we do run up, I'm able to enter calls. I can do both. It just kind of depends what happens. So, yep, that is the sentiment. So, market opens. We shoot up. Looks pretty dang decent for calls. I need one more candle, though. I did not get that candle, so now I'm waiting again. If we invalidate this entire bounce, I'm going to enter puts. If we invalidate this drop, I'm going to enter calls. Well, we invalidated the bounce, and I did end up entering puts on ES. Or SPX puts. Now, at the time of entry, ES was a lot weaker than NQ. As you can see, ES invalidated the entire bounce, NQ did not. Now, in reality, my big PT is this gap fill, right? That's my sentiment. But realistically, that's really, really far away. Realistically, I'm more so looking for NQ to get to demand or maybe this first pivot. But I say that I'm planning on trimming heavy with demand. As far as the alert, it says the big PT's far away, but I'm giving demand below a shot. Now, unfortunately, right after I entered this, NQ did end up flipping weak, and ES flipped strong, which sucks. But ES did hit demand, and I got a really heavy trim in for plus 22% gains. Now, I trimmed roughly, was it quite 2/3 of my? It was something like 2/3 of my size, a little bit less than 2/3. I trimmed most of my position there. But I end up filling KQQ puts as well. Now, kind of the rationale for that is NQ was dumping. Now, it's hard to visualize this, and that's why I'm kind of trying to pick carefully what I'm going to say. It's hard to visualize it because we had this huge buying wick form. But before this buying wick formed, this was a very bearish candle, okay? This was a very bearish candle. I mean, it was a red candle just like this. And at this point, it looks like NQ is way weaker than ES. It is extremely weak. I'm looking for NQ to actually break demand and get all these pivots here. So right after I entered, NQ flipped way weaker than ES. And I would have much rather been in QQQ. Well, what I did is I ended up trimming almost 2/3 of my entire SPX position. And I added a very small position of QQQ puts. So overall, I ended up, at the end of it said and done, I was in half a size position between both SPX puts and QQQ puts. Okay, so I trimmed most of my SPX, but I over trimmed it so I can add a little bit of QQQ because I'm thinking, okay, it looks great to break demand. I think it's likely to continue down. And NQ is dumping way, as you can see, way, way, way harder than ES is. So I want to be exposed to the NASDAQ drop as well. So I over trimmed SPX and did that so I would make room for a very light QQQ position. But between both my SPX position and my QQQ position, they totaled to about half of one position size. Okay? So plus 22% gains, locked it in. And as far as my QQQ position, I didn't draw it on my chart, but it was something, it was roughly like down here now. You know, this trade, big PT was here. This one entered roughly here. You know, I kind of entered it on the bounce. And really I was looking for this pivot here on NQ. This was kind of my stop loss. This was the game plan. But unfortunately, we did kind of end up bouncing. And I stopped out on this candle here. I believe it was this candle. Let me check. No, almost stopped out on this candle. So I believe my QQQ puts were actually up here and my stop loss was like right here. Something like that. It was the next candle that I almost stopped out on, but the selling wick and it flipped red ended up saving it. We came back down, then we shot up, and then I was about to stop out again, and then we put in a selling wick. And I was about to stop out again, but we put in a selling wick, and then we dumped. Keep in mind, these puts are chopped to hell now. We did dump all my. Hang on, my average was not. I want to say my average was up here somewhere. I really can't remember. Oh no, it was somewhere up here because I remember NQ. Like if I were trading futures, it would have flipped into the green there. But my puts were chopped. Like it was rough. So at this point, if it invalidates this drop, I'm bullish. So at this point, my stop loss came down. Same thing here for ES, and I stopped out on this candle here. Right away on this candle. So finally stopped out. So unfortunately, I'm slight red on the day now. I made about $60 a contract on my SPX trade, right? I stopped out of my SPX trade here early because the puts chopped so much. I stopped out of my SPX trade for minus $60 a contract, and then my QQQ trade for minus $24 a contract, right? So I was very slightly red. Very slightly red. I think I was red by like less than $50 at this point because I trimmed most for green and then sold the last bit for red. It's pretty much trim half for green, trim half for red. They evened out. So at this point, I'm very slight red. I'm like, okay, you know, ES bounced out of demand. That demand looks really strong. NQ's honoring this demand. It did sweep this pivot here. You know, I'm kind of leaning bullish for this trend line break to the upside. At this point, we've invalidated a majority of this pullback. So it's starting to look fairly bullish. And on this candle, I enter QQQ calls. Here. PT was new high of day. Now, of course, I could have gone more, and I did want to go more, which is why I kept a small runner position. But this is the same trade that I just got out of. Same trade. Same liquidity analysis. Pretty basic stuff. Got the PT, sold almost all of it right when new high of day hit. And then sold the last bit of it on this candle here because I had a runner position left. I made 24% on that trade. And that was pretty much for the entire position. It was a full-size position right at entry. So That was good. So now I'm green on the day by roughly 120% green trade. Now, ES did sweep this high bearishly with pretty much a shooting star. So did NQ. But ES flipped much stronger than NQ. Look at these candles. Look how much stronger ES is than NQ. So much stronger. And at this point, it's invalidated a majority of this drop. It's trying to reject the 61.8. It did get a lot above it, so I wouldn't really call this a 61.8 rejection. And at this point, I'm really starting to favor SPX calls, especially when we made a lower low of the buying wick. It started looking like it's putting in bullish consolidation. And compare it to NQ. ES is so much stronger than NQ right now. And I'm personally thinking it's more likely that NQ puts in kind of a pullback. This is a temporary pullback before we take out new high of day again. So I believe NQ is likely to invalidate most of this pullback, and in doing so, it's likely to get new high of day. Well, ES is stronger than NQ. So I would like to take an SPX just half size though, because I'm technically buying a continuation trade on a pivot. I'd like to enter a half size trade roughly here. Roughly, if I get a green candle validating this selling wick, I'd like to take a half size trade. The PT would more so be pre-market high, but I'd like to trim in demand and trim when NQ gets new high of day. But I have to enter half size though, because it is a little bit risky. I am entering a continuation trade on a previous pivot, and it could get another oscillation, right? So I need to save buying power to average down in case it makes a lower low before it goes up, which is somewhat likely. I'd say it's maybe a 55% chance, 60% chance. I enter calls on this candle here. Build my SPX calls half size. Look at NQ, by the way. It put in another lower low of the buying wick. It looked really, really good. Really good. But I do technically have reason to not enter this trade, because it is technically continuation on a pivot. But looking back on it, I really don't mind it. I mean, it's a pretty textbook bull pennant. The selling wick is a little bit big. But if you take this bull pennant, and you take where it's at in the chart, how it's invalidated a majority of this drop, and then you compare that to NQ's weakness, like how much stronger ES is than NQ. Looking back on it, this trade was actually a really likely trade to play out. Now, we did end up right after dumping. ES ended up flipping weaker than NQ. I took my average down on this candle. Really early on into this candle, by the way. Right when it swept this lower low. So at this point, I was in half size position. I entered the trade at 2.8. And I averaged down around 2.2. My average was 2.5. So I'm in one normal size position, because that's the key. I entered half size. I end up stopping out during the next candle, halfway through the next candle for minus 35%. So I was green on the day by 1 plus 20% trade. And then I took a 35% full loss. So now I'm back red on the day by one small red trade, unfortunately. But this candle is extremely bearish, and I'm triggered back into my previous sentiment, which the entire run is invalidated. I'm bearish. So I triggered myself into puts here. Now with these puts, I was pretty much full size. Pretty much the same thing as before. NQ's new low of day is here. My next major pivot is NQ new low of day and NQ ES new low of day. So I'm planning on trimming at ES low of day. But realistically, that's not what I'm looking for. I mean, we confirmed a super bearish liquidity sweep. My bull pennant got completely invalidated. It looks like we're setting up for a pretty big dump. And as you can see, this kind of looks like a really janky head to shoulder. So I can see a good sized move to the downside. This entire range was about yay wide. How wide this range is, if you can see how wide it is, it pretty much lines up for the gap fill. And you guys know I'm 100% for gap fills. Whenever there's a gap on the futures chart, I always tell you guys to draw it. Even if I don't get to trade it personally within my first hour, I tell you guys to draw. I tell you guys it's likely to fill all those things. So really, I'm planning on trimming here. But if we bounce, I'd like to add back to what I've trimmed. And that's exactly what happened. I trimmed. Roughly, I want to say a little bit less than half my position. And the reason for, I would have trimmed a lot more, but the reason for that is NQ barely missed low of day. This pivot here at 22,950, which you guys, it's going to be hard for you guys to see because my lettering is small right now. This pivot was barely missed. It's almost as good as a perfect double bottom now. So I'm very bearish for this pivot to break, which is why I didn't trim like the entire position. So I trimmed a little bit less than half size, a little bit more than a third, if I remember correctly. But if we bounce, I plan on re-adding on the bounce. Now, on this specific trim, I got roughly 25 to 30% gains on this trim. So it was a really nice trim. The trim didn't make me green on the day because I'm still down by like 15%, but it got me really close. Like I was pretty close to break even because keep in mind, I'm only red on the day by like 1 minus 15% trade. I trimmed almost half of my normal position size at like 25%. So I'm really close to break even on the day. We bounce. I wait for a higher high. And once a selling wick makes a higher high, boom, I add here. So took a risk. Everything that I added, or sorry, everything that I trimmed, I re-added. And it was at the same price, right? I entered this trade at 2.4, I re-added at 2.4. Or no, sorry, I filled at 2.5. No, that's not true. The next one was 2.5. This one was 2.4. So I re-added here. It looked really good. ES is a lot weaker than NQ. Now, it is definitely risky, but I'm still looking for NQ new low of day. So that'll put ES maybe somewhere right around down here. Back in full size position. We'll see what happens. I trim again in demand. I believe it was right. Nope, not yet. Right when ES gets new low of day. Not quite. Right here. Boom. I trim again. Everything that I added, I trimmed. Again, this would have been a way heavier add, but NQ still wasn't at low of day. But this is why I'm in SPX instead of NQ. Strength and weakness analysis is so important. I was in ES because it's so much weaker. Look at it. So, I added back to full size position, and I just trimmed it again. I got 39% gains on this trim, almost 40% on this trim. And I would have sold a lot more, but I am so bearish for NQ to get new low of day. So bearish, right? It's so close. So I don't trim everything. I don't trim super heavy because this is my main PT here. And at this point, it's looking like by the time NQ gets there, ES is going to be starting to break demand and getting into this gap. Well, we bounce again. And I'm like, I'm still so bearish for this to break, but now it's kind of looking at it. Here's the problem. As far as NQ's chart is concerned, I am extremely bearish for it to break low of day. Extremely bearish. It's easy. As far as the ES gap is concerned, I'm very bearish for the gap to fill. But if we look at the ES candlesticks and we look at the demand, we've now made 2 major lower lows, sweeping pivots in demand with volume at the bottom of each one. Massive volume spike here, massive volume spike here, and okay volume spike here. This is a reversal setup. So it's starting to look possible that I'm not going to be able to get my PT in this morning, unfortunately. And I've already been trading for 45 minutes so far. But at this point, I'm actually, if I remember correctly, I was pretty much break even or slightly green on the day. Right? I was definitely slightly green on the day. But if NQ makes a higher high, I'm going to give it one more chance and re-add to my position, bring it back to full size. And it's nice because, I trimmed almost a full size position. I mean, between my 2 trims, it was probably 3/4 of a position size. So, I mean, it's like I got an entire extra green trade today just off those trims. But as you can see, ES is still a lot weaker than NQ. And right when NQ swept a higher high here, and it's kind of hard to see. Right when it swept a higher high here, I re-added one more time. I'm like, all right, I'll give it one more shot. NQ made a higher high. It made higher lows. Pretty bearish for it to go. But unfortunately, the puts were chopping a ton. I can't hold all the way to my stop loss, unfortunately. I gave as much time as I could. I had to stop out on this candle here. Because at this point, it's like, all right, NQ short squeezing. I'm still bearish for it to get down here eventually, but I can't hold anymore. It's invalidated, right? ES made a bunch of lower lows in demand. I knew that it had a decent possible reversal setup. I took a chance on the ad, brought it back to full size, whatever. I end up stopping out for a minus 18%. I stopped out at 2.0 now. On that extra ad, that final ad, right after I trimmed twice, I did fill at 2.5. So I ended up finishing the day small red. And I said I was red by only 1.5 trades today, but after looking at my broker, I'm only red by like one trade. I finished red by pretty much one minus 15% red trade, which is nothing, unfortunately. So yeah, I can't hold through this at this point. Majority of the move is invalidated. I have to be bullish for NQ new high of day. But I do send out a TA alert, and I say if at any point NQ invalidates a majority of this bounce, I am extremely bearish for not only it to break new low of day, but continue through these pivots, right? It's a great trade setup, great risk to reward, and all these things. And by that time, if ES is still weak, I'd be bearish for the gap fill as well. So I sent you guys that TA alert, and sure enough, it did just enough to stop me out of the trade, sweep me, and then it did, after a lot of time, ended up dumping, and ES did end up filling the gap completely. So we were 100% correct on our analysis. The only analysis or hypothesis that was incorrect was this one. And keep in mind, being incorrect or correct has nothing to do with being profitable, right? Who cares if you're correct or incorrect? It just matters, whether you're correct more times than not out of a sample size of at least 20 trades, right? So on a trade by trade basis, being correct or incorrect or green or red does not matter. But the nice thing is the analysis was correct. So a lot of you guys kept trading. I got to honor my rules. I wasn't willing to take another loss because at that point, if I were to continue trading, I could technically be triggered into calls right here, right? I'll just go back. But it was nice because the analysis was correct. So a lot of you guys did end up continuing to trade and end up finishing the day better than I did. A lot of you guys end up finishing green. It's really good analysis. It's just unfortunate sometimes that's not going to play out. And to be frank, that's the first time that's happened in probably 3 weeks where I had a strong hypothesis. And unfortunately, it stopped me out. And I had to stop trading before it played out. It's been a while since that happened. We've been on a crazy run lately. But realistically, if I want to get triggered into a trade, I could technically get triggered into QQQ calls here. If I do, I would have stopped out. And if I stop out, well, now I'm triggered back into puts. Okay, now if put stops out, say it goes up and I end up stopping out, that's another loss, and I'm going to have to get back into calls. Because as you guys know, I trade to liquidity. Most of my trades are momentum trades to liquidity. And the way we're starting to compress, it's far too risky for me to continue trading. Because if I continue trading and lose, unfortunately, I'm probably not going to be able to stop trading unless I reach my P&L threshold to where it's like I lost too much, I got to stop. So I was no longer willing to spend the amount of money required to find out if the trade was going to work out. If that makes sense, right? You have to be willing and able to spend the amount of money your edge says is necessary to find out if the next trade is going to be winner. And at that point, I wasn't willing to do it. So unfortunately, I had to miss it. But again, it did play out. Pretty good analysis this morning. The only kind of questionable trade was this one. Looking back on it, though, I do really think it was a very likely trade. So I don't mind it, especially entering with the half-size entry. I don't think it was bad at all. But this was the only trade that was technically kind of gray area avoidable. Obviously I see plenty of reasons to take the trade. I did take the trade. But I also see some reasons to not take the trade. But aside from that, I'd say this morning was flawless. Good psychology, good risk management, all of those things. So pretty satisfied, especially for, after you go on a green streak that lasts weeks. For most traders, your first red day is going to wipe you out and blow up your options portfolio. And that was absolutely not the case. It's a very mild red day, so I will take it. But with that being said, does anyone in chat have any questions regarding anything that I just talked about? No questions? Everyone's good? All right, sweet. Well, I will. We'll be back to reviewing my trades every single day this week, even if it means I'm doing them a little bit later. But I'll let you guys know when this recording is posted. And good luck if you guys continue trading. If you guys need anything, you guys know where to find me. And I will see you guys later.